Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Brattleboro Literary Festival, my favorite weekend of the year. Right? We are so lucky. I'm Starla Tronica. I'm part of the festival organizing committee, and this year's festival is made possible by the generous support of our festival sponsors, the Brattleboro Community Television, Jenny Altschuler, and Barry Green, Elizabeth Catlin, the Stepansky Family Trust, and the Vermont Humanities Council, and of course, poets and writers. We would like to thank our advertisers in your lovely brochures as well, and we encourage you to support them. The festival is run entirely by volunteers, but has very real expenses. So we encourage you to make a donation at one of the many donation boxes you will see throughout the weekend, or you can use the QR code to donate online through our website. So please take a moment now to turn off the ringer on your cell phones, but feel free to use it to take photos and share them with us on social media. And then I would like to say that this special program has a special sponsor, which is the Dublin Book Group. So thank you to them. All right, everybody. I know it's early in the morning, but are you ready for adventure? So grab your sword. I hope you brought it. You may need it. Buckle up, hold on to your hats, and hoist the mainsail, because we are about to sail away for an hour on the words of two master storytellers. Now, what are the chances that readers would be treated to two recent novels that each chart a daring, rollicking, harrowing heist with a cast of incredible characters in pursuit of two objects that still actually exist in the world today? And both have a slightly gruesome element. One more so than others. And then, what are the chances that both of those authors would be sitting with us right here in the same room on an autumn morning in Vermont? I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be. Lucky us. Tania James is an award-winning author of 4 works of fiction: The Tusk That Did the Damage, which was a finalist for the International Dylan Thomas Prize and the Financial Times Oppenheimer Award; Anagrams and Other Stories, named a Best Book of 2012 by Kirkus Reviews, Library Journal, and the San Francisco Chronicle; the novel Atlas of Unknowns, which was a New York Times Editor's Choice and a finalist for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. And her short stories have appeared in Freeman's, The Future of New Writing, Granta, The New Yorker, Oh, the Oprah Magazine, and One Story, among other places. And she was featured on Symphony Shorts, or Selected Shorts, Symphony Spaces, Selected Shorts. One of my favorite things to listen to. She has received fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, Ragdale, and Sustainable Arts Foundation, and the Fulbright Program, and she is an associate professor of English at George Mason University. She is here today to talk about her novel, Loot, which was longlisted for the National Book Award. It's the incredible story of the creation, loss, and attempt to recover a remarkable automaton, and it is filled with a myriad of meticulous details that make it completely credible. From the accurate articulation of woodwork and clockwork to the vivid descriptions of treachery and battle, and the divine descriptions of the finery and failings of life in a lavish English country house, she does more than show the past as it was, but she captures the very spirit of the time. M.T. Anderson, also known as Tobin, has appeared at our festival twice before. Over the past 20 years, he has garnered an abundance of awards in his career as an author of books for young people. If I were to cite all of them here, there would be no time left for him to speak, so I'll just mention a few highlights. His book, The Astonishing Life of Octavia Nothing, Traitor to the Nation, Volume 1, The Pox Party, was a National Book Award winner. And National Book Award finalists include The Assassination of Brangwyn Spurge, Feed, Symphony of the Dead, Dmitri Shostakovich, and The Siege of Leningrad. It was also on the long list, the National Book Award long list. And then last year, he received a Newbery Honor Medal for Elf Dog and Owlhead, about a magical dog that roams the hills of Vermont. He has multiple awards and honors from the Boston Globe Hornbook Committees and the LA Times, and has also received several Michael L. Prince honors. Tobin is a lifelong New Englander. He lives in a small, haunted 18th century house in the hills of Vermont. He is here to talk this morning about his first novel for adults, Nicked, a high-spirited novel based on an actual attempt to relocate the remains of St. Nicholas. It's filled with colorful characters, including pirates, monks, lascivious nuns, a dog-headed man, and it has a touch of romance. So welcome, Tania and Tobin.
Good morning, Brattleboro. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Star, for the introduction. Thank you to this festival. I am the lucky one to be here with Tobin. I am going to talk a little bit about how I came to write this book, and then I'll do a little reading. As Star said, I've published 3 books of fiction. I published them between 2009 and 2015. And with every one of those books, those 3 books, I felt sort of like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I felt more confident with every book. I felt a sort of growing authority over the things I wanted to write. And then a few things happened in my life. First, I had children, so that was a thing in 2014 and 2018. And then I took a tenure-track job teaching at George Mason University's MFA program. And these are beautiful things, and neither my children or my colleagues are here, so you know I'm telling the truth. They were actually really great things. But they also coincided with this period of real creative confusion for me, and or ambivalence. And for the first time in my writing life, I began to feel like I just didn't know what I really wanted to be working on. And during that period, I drafted 2 other novels. I say 2.5, but my husband says 3, that just didn't work. And I kept, like in ER when they take the paddles and they put it on the thing and jolt it, and I occasionally try to jolt it back to life and nothing would come back to life. And I don't know why they didn't work, but I do think that I was desperate for delight and adventure, that word that Star used, and my writing just wasn't giving me either of those things. But then luckily I came across Tipu's Tiger. Has anybody seen Tipu's Tiger? Oh, okay, we got one. Tipu's Tiger is this spectacular 18th century automaton, and it's composed of a 6-foot-long wooden tiger that's mauling the throat of an English soldier. And back in the heyday, in its heyday, you could turn a hand crank on its side, and the tiger would grunt, and the soldier would groan, and his hand would sort of pathetically flap its hand up and down in protest about being eaten. And all the while, there's organ music kind of playing this lovely sort of soundtrack from inside the body of the the tiger. Tipu's Tiger was commissioned by a South Indian ruler named Tipu Sultan, who I think you could guess hated the British East India Company. And he had good reason for that, because his kingdom, the kingdom of Mysore, had fought a total of 4 wars against the British East India Company. It ended in this violent and sort of very bloody siege by the British that wiped out the capital city. So I bought a postcard of Tipu's Tiger and I pinned it over my computer. But to be honest, I found myself thinking more about the maker of the automaton than the automaton itself. And I thought, what if the artist wanted the automaton back? And what if he would go to any length, cross any ocean just to get it? And indeed, in my novel, he does cross oceans and borders. He goes from India to France to England. So in part, this is a heist novel. In part, this is a country house novel, an English country house novel. And in the whole, I think it's to me, it's really about the coming of age of an artist. And the heist part really excited me because it seemed to resonate with questions that I think that museums are facing right now regarding plundered colonial artifacts, like the Rosetta Stone, which I grew up never knowing that's a plundered artifact, or the Benin bronzes that were just returned to Benin. Questions like, to whom does a prize of war really belong? How do we make sense or make sense of or contend with that bloody history? How do we lay claim to a heritage through the stories we tell? In my research early on, I quickly found that history tells us nothing about the makers, only that it's speculated that Tipu's tiger was probably a collaboration between a local Indian woodcarver and a French clockmaker or engineer at the court of Tipu Sultan. So I didn't know anything about wood carving when I started this novel. And I didn't know anything about the strong French presence in India, but I did know something about artistic aspiration and this desire to be seen, this longing to be seen. And that was how I found my way into this character at the heart of the novel. His name is Abbas. And in spite of living in precarious times, he wants more than anything to leave a mark on the world. And which is sort of why I wake up in the mornings and I make my tiny marks on the page. It all comes from that private wish to connect with something larger than myself. So the entire time, as I told you, I kept that postcard above my computer of Tipu's tiger, and I also kept a printout of an email from my agent. I had sent to her, I had those failed novels, and I was like, I don't know. I was feeling, just really uncertain. Is this going to work? Someone tell me, is this going to work? And I sent her the first 2 chapters, and as I was writing them, I asked her, what do you think? And she wrote back that she liked them very much, and also, if you don't, quote, if you don't finish this, I'm going to handcuff you to your desk. And as an artist, I respond well to tough love. So those words in that postcard fueled me for the next few years. This is probably an overshare, but after I finished the novel, I bought her toy handcuffs as a funny gift, and I put in a package, and I went to the post office, and I guess it was an oddly shaped package, and the postal worker, was like, "What's in this package?" And in my reflexive fear of authority, I immediately said toy handcuffs, and she had the best response. She was like, she put her hand up like this, and she was like, "Enough said." We've come a long way. Me and this book. It was a delight. It was a refuge during the pandemic, and it was a trust fall in the way that all novels are, I think, in writing them. So it's a joy to share it with you. So I'm going to read from just a few pages in the novel that I've never read from before. So we begin with Abbas, the woodcarver. He's a poor woodcarver in 18th century Mysore. And he's been tasked with assisting this French clockmaker at the court of Tipu Sultan to make what Tipu has commissioned, which is Mysore's first automaton, Tipu's tiger. And his mentor's name is Lucien Deleuze. He's a Frenchman. Of all the rooms Abbas has entered over the past 2 days, the workshop of Lucien Deleuze, is the one that steals his breath. The walls bristle with tools, at least 3 of every kind and size, vaner and saw and adze and axe, gouges so small and with so many different tips that he cannot predict what all they can do. Nor does he know what to do with himself in their presence, what to touch first or not touch at all. A bouquet of long wooden planks is arranged in a bin, a lathe awaits, and on one of the 2 tables rests a great mass of wood stripped of its bark and propped sideways. Dulez summons him to a table where an open notebook lies flat, a sharpened stick in the gutter. Un stylo, says Dulez, brandishing the sharpened point, the rest of the graphite rod sheathed in wood. Abbas is still examining the stylo when Dulez sets the rifle from yesterday on the table. Alors, says Dulez, pointing to the ornament of the tiger and soldier, see if you can draw this from the left side. Abbas chokes the stylo between his fingers. He looks for as long as he can at the ornament before setting the nib to paper. A few inquiring strokes turn to supple lines. The grain of the paper hums through his fingertips as the drawing grows into an image not of his design, yet somehow becoming his own. Finished, Abbas sits back, returns the stylo to the gutter, awaits praise. Hastily, Dulez draws atop the sketch, explaining how the tiger will be hollow, with a bellows in the head and a pipe organ in the body. A lateral slice just above the tiger's ears will create a sort of lid, which, when removed, will expose the organ pipes. A door along its rib cage will open onto a set of ivory keys, to be operated by an organ player poised by the tiger's left flank. Where shall we hide? Abbas asks. Why would we hide? Says Dulez. So as to make the growling sounds from inside the tiger. No, I told you, the bellows, Dulez waves a hand. It will take too long to explain. You work on the outside and leave the inside to me. With a folding ruler, Dulez chalks the dimensions of the automaton onto the great mass of wood. Abbas passes a hand over the slab. The grain is tight and consistent, the wood spongy, slightly leached of its juices, though not so much that it will crack at the first tap. And you, says Dulez, handing the chalk to Abbas, who roughs the outline of the tiger and the soldier, making sure to stay well within Dulez's markings. Here is the anvil of the head, the line of a haunch, the sweep of the belly, the bulb of the muzzle, the bend of a limb. He is shaky at first, but the more he draws, the steadier his hand. After they check all the measurements 5 times, Dulez goes to his table. Now I shall begin on the organ, he says. And me, Sab? Says Abbas. Dulez shrugs as if the answer is obvious. Now you make the tiger. Abbas tries to ignore the little lunge in his stomach as he goes to the wall of tools. His eye leaps from one to the next, dizzy with chisels, drawing a blank. He stands very still, bewildered by every second that goes by in which he has still done nothing. Abbas, says Dulez, come here a moment. With a sigh, Abbas joins Dulez by the scroll saw. Dulez gestures with his pipe. Pluck it. Pluck the blade. Abbas plucks the long, thin blade. It pings, vibrating. If the blade is too tight, it will snap, says Dulez. If the blade is too loose, it will snap. It must have the proper tension. Tu vois? You want me to use the scroll saw? Says Abbas. No, says Dulez. I am saying you must hurry up slowly. It's something my papa used to say. The only useful advice he ever gave me, festina lant. The phrase makes little sense to Abbas, but by the time he has returned to the wall of tools, the fear has slightly loosened its hold to the point where he can bring himself to take one of the larger gouges off the wall, its curved bit the width of his thumb. He holds the tool up to examine the handle, fine and ferruled, in perfect alignment with the tang. Next, he selects a round-headed mallet, fixed tight in its handle. These tools are superior to any he has used before, but as he well knows, the tools do not make the carver. Armed, he approaches the mass of wood, and before he can be paralyzed once more, he studies the drawing and begins where he always begins, at the highest point. He knocks the mallet onto the chisel, another knock, and another, the blows few but firm. The wood begins to lose its anonymity. He learns its fragrance and grain. Straightening the chisel, he knocks toward what he imagines to be a tiger, waiting to be unleashed. Thank you. Thank you. And here is M.T. Anderson.
Well, I gotta say, this now really records my stomach well. Just do this. Hey, so thanks for having me again. It's great to be here with Tania. We met this morning. We had a delightful breakfast at the inn, a very nice pastoral chit chat, and it's great to be here. So what I'm going to be talking about is Nicked, which is my first novel that is solely for adults. And it is based on a bizarre, but like Tania's novel, a true story, which is that two rival cities in Italy actually raced to be the first to steal the corpse of Saint Nicholas, that is to say Santa Claus, from its tomb in southern, what is now southern Turkey. And they did this because supposedly the body wept a kind of a magical liquor that if you drank it would heal anything. And it actually, they succeeded. The people from the city of Bari actually did steal this body and in reality did take it back to the heel of Italy, where it still resides to this day. Though there is in fact a repatriation claim where the Turkish government is saying, you've got to bring this back. And of course the Italians are like, it's 1,000 years ago. But it's interesting. There is a kind of a modern complex political element in that the Orthodox and Catholic Christians want this to be used as an object of veneration. These are relics. Whereas the Turks want to set this up, the basilica that it was taken from, as a museum. And so there is actually, especially because, as you know, there's been a kind of conservative drive towards making the state of Turkey itself more thoroughly Islamic. So there's also all of this going on about like the Hagia Sophia and that kind of thing. So anyway, it's an interesting battle, that repatriation battle, very unlike a lot of the repatriation battles that I think are quite uncomplicated, where things are being returned to India, Nepal, Cambodia, whatever. And I discovered this story just because when I was a kid, I loved music. Like a teenager, I loved classical music. And there are several pieces that are about St. Nicholas and about the historical St. Nicholas, not the kind of confection that we came up with in the 19th century. So the St. Nicholas, who is a bishop in Myra in southern Turkey. Well, back then it was the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire, and he performed all of these bizarre miracles, so much stranger than what we know. Like, for example, he fought a serial killer who had killed children and pickled their bodies, and so he was serving them to people during a famine. And so St. Nicholas went and found the pickling jars in the back of this guy's inn and pulled out the corpses and arranged the flesh on the bodies, and the children came back to life. So that's one of his miracles. The one that actually that's one of the reasons he's connected with children also. And the reason why he's seen as a gift giver is because he, as a teenager, overheard the father in the house next door telling his daughters, "I'm sorry, I have no money for us to live on. I'm selling you all to a brothel." And so St. Nicholas went and in the night took 3 bags of his parents' gold and hurled them secretly through the window into that house to give the girls dowries so they could be legitimately married. I guess a kind of legitimate form of prostitution instead of and that's why he's known as a gift giver. And so I'm serious. And so during the Middle Ages, I guess the thing is, you're saying, like, when you give your children gifts, you're saying, well, I don't have to sell you for another year at least, So these stories fascinated me as a teenager. I thought about, like, it would be really cool to someday write something about this historical Nicholas. And so when I started a few years ago to do research into the historical Nicholas, there was a paragraph in the book saying, of course, his body was eventually stolen by some Italian thieves and taken to Italy, and I was like, you can't just pass by that. It's like, I want to know more. So anyway, and it was a super interesting route of there are incredibly detailed descriptions of this theft that were written just a few weeks after it happened. And we even have things like the complete list of all the sailors who participated, because we have the expense reports, because they were very canny. The reason you steal a relic, the reason you have a relic is because you're trying to attract people to your city, especially in the case of St. Nicholas, who's patron saint of sailors. So the idea is we're a port city, we have the body of St. Nicholas. Everyone who wants to travel across the Mediterranean is going to come to our port and pray to him before setting out. And so these sailors, before they would allow the body off the boat, they made a deal. They were like, we have his body, we'll give it to you if you will sign a contract saying that in perpetuity, we and our descendants get a cut of the pilgrim fees. And so we actually have, from 100 years later, the church's kind of laborious thing about here are the people who we still have to pay out money to. So we actually have even the full list of 70-some sailors who took part in this theft. So it's kind of an amazing thing that this event that happened 1,000 years ago, we actually have info about. So anyway, I turned it into a novel. Though in the course of it, I discovered that there were several documents that had not been translated. And so I'm going to end up doing a nonfiction version of the same story for teens next, because it turns out that what I made up was actually not as bizarre as the reality, of course. So, but I turned it into, I wanted it to be sort of a heist tale. A lot of the details are real. Some of them have been changed to kind of, play along with the model of the heist and also of rom-com. So I decided to the monk who hires this relic thief being a real medieval profession, believe it or not. And the relic thief himself have a very uneasy attraction to each other, because in fiction, if not in life, a possibility of betrayal is kind of hot. So what I'm going to do is read you the scene where the people of the city of Bari, the powerful men of the city of Bari, hear a pitch from this guy, this saint hunter. And the saint hunter is saying, this is why you need to hire me to steal this body for you. So here we go. Here is the saint hunter speaking. I am Tania, saint seeker, relic hunter. I have traveled from Kashgar to Zanj and served many princes of the earth and friends of Christ above. You claim you can get us Nicholas. This is the moment, you are sure? Tania began his pitch. The Seljuks have swept out of the steppe and across the face of the civilized world. The Arabs and the Persians have fallen before them. They have taken Khorasan and Khwarazm, and now they have pushed deep into Byzantium. A Norman said, alas, Byzantium, and tittered. Tania smiled. Mira, where the blessed Nicholas lies, is in a state of chaos. The Byzantines, the Seljuk Turks, no one knows who rules that city now. Or the whole state of Lycia. The coast there is in utter confusion. It would not be difficult to slip in, grab the corpse, and liberate the saint. Sorry, I have to have gesticulation room. I spent a couple formative years in Italy when I was small. Venice has asked me if I will go fetch the bones for them. This is the moment. In a few days, I set off for Lycia, and I will bring the relics back to Italy. He clasped his hands behind his back. If Bari does not want St. Nicholas, Venice does. The Venetians are bastards, a merchant clarified. You have asked us for twice what Venice offered you, said the Duke. It is an appalling sum. So you might ask why you would want the corpse of St. Nicholas, said Tania. The Normans waited for an answer. Saint Anastasia, Tania announced in a loud voice. Saint Anastasia was born without hands, the daughter of an innkeeper. She did what work she could with her sleeves pinned shut. One night, a husband and young wife came to the inn seeking shelter after a decree had gone out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. The wife was pregnant. There was no room in the inn. I presume you've heard this story. They slept in a stable. His audience gaped. In the night, Anastasia, daughter of the innkeeper, woke. There was singing and the tolling of celestial bells. There was light coming from the stable. She rushed down to investigate, worried about fire. Instead, she found a glowing child laid in a manger, no crib for his bed. She knelt before him. She wished to bathe him as a midwife would, but she had no hands. The Blessed Mother picked up the child and laid him cradled in Anastasia's arms. Anastasia wished with all her heart she could care for the baby as the Virgin slept. And lo, an angel came out of heaven and delivered her a pair of hands, white as lilies. With these hands she tended the Christ child through that long winter's night as ox and ass stood by. Tien looked upon the sitting Duke and his rapt company. I recovered St. Anastasia's hands. There was an appreciative murmur among the Normans. They were of ivory, inset with jewels and rare teak. I found them in a treasure house in the Maghreb. I penetrated the fortress, slipped the hands out of the vault without detection, and delivered them to the Church of St. George in Fraxinetum. Within 3 months, Fraxinetum was drawing 500 pilgrims a day, ships arriving from all over the world, caravans coming from over the Alps, paying imposts. The city has repaired its walls and built a shrine. This is the power of a holy relic. Nods of reluctant approval all around. Consider what a saint can do for a city. Venice wants to hire me to fetch Nicholas. But Venice already has St. Mark, an evangelist, one of a set of 4. Uneasy looks among the Normans. And they don't just have St. Mark, also St. Athanasius, St. Zacharias, and the foot of Catherine of Siena. The treasure hunter was now prowling between the men, restless with the energy of expertise. Everyone has a relic. Rome's burial grounds have been picked clean. All the Roman saints are spoken for. Don't even ask. The monastery at Fulda has Sebastian and Cecilia sewn up, one pierced by arrows, the other burned to death and then beheaded while playing the hydraulic organ. Sure, Fulda only has a few shreds of Cecilia, but they also have Urban, Felicity, Felicissimus, and Emerentina. They have Boniface, Cornelius, Callistus, who was buried right next to Cecilia, and Columbanna. He spoke these names directly into the faces of the astonished merchants, smacking his hands together with each martyr. Agapetus, Georgius, Eugenia, Maximius, Vicentius, and Emerentina. I got them, Columbanna. Fulda is a most prosperous abbey, said the archbishop in a fever of longing. Constantinople, continued the saint hunter, seat of great Byzantium, has the true cross, of course, and also the 2 more disappointing crosses the thieves hung on. They have the body of the prophet Daniel, the robe and girdle of the Virgin Mary, the hair of John the Forerunner, and the rod of Moses. Gentlemen, if you wish Bari to remain a great port city, you need a saint, and you need a saint with draw. I can get that for you. Nicholas is no ordinary saint. You have all heard of his holy liquor, the oil that drops off his corpse. Imagine how many will come to your city to taste it. How does it taste, men of Bari? It tastes of lilies. It tastes of myrrh. It tastes of redemption. It tastes of gold. Thank you very much. So now I guess we sit up here and talk, and we'll ask each other questions for a few minutes. You know, I think if you don't mind, I'll move these things out of the way so we are not weirdly separated from each other. But yeah. And so we were just told to ask each other questions. So I want to hear about the research you did. Did you see the tiger?
I did. I started writing during the pandemic. So there was travel bans, especially to India. So I was writing just mainly through book research. It was after, toward the end that I saw Tipu's tiger. I went to the V&A Museum. Victoria Albert Museum is where it is in London. And I'm kind of glad I didn't see it before I started writing. It takes a certain kind of, I don't know if idiocy is the right word, but a certain kind of obliviousness to the weight of the history behind that thing. And I think I would have had a hard time feeling sort of emboldened to make my own history around it. I mean, I've really just felt awe. It was much bigger somehow than I thought. And I think seeing it would have kind of gotten in the way of me sort of being able to play. I mean,
how big is it? Because like as you're reading that description and the guy is going to carve the thing, and yet like suddenly I was confronted with the idea of how much has to fit inside of it.
Yeah.
Like it must be huge to have a miniature pipe organ in there.
I want to say it felt to me, I mean, it might be shorter, but it felt to me like the width of these 4 chairs together, but it was, no, maybe 3 of the chairs together. But I was just going to say that the element, I feel like I'm really happy to be paired with you, because I think both of us have a very playful approach in a way to history. And I was wondering if that's something that you kind of consciously brought to the subject matter, or were you sort of like, did it ever just, how does like comedy and operate in your work here? Is it something you're sort of kind of consciously imposing on the work, or is it just arises out of your point of view?
Well, I think in this case, the history I'm talking about is not one that is fraught in the same way that what you're talking about is. So, I mean, I've done historical novels before that are about, for example, like slavery at the inception of the American Revolution and that kind of thing, where there is a natural gravity that comes about I'm going to try to move away. So, like, now that we got all cozy, we now like have feedback. So, there's a lesson about humanity in this. Yes, Tania, who is now weirdly far away. So I think that in some cases there's a kind of gravity to a history that demands, obviously, that you take account of the suffering that is at the heart of a lot of human stories. This was not that story. It's just a whack-ass weird story. So as a result, I think my approach was just naturally going to be one that was a little bit more kind of like winking at the idea of the medieval relic and of specifically that I'm fascinated by con men because I am unable to lie. I mean, it's not that I'm morally opposed to it. It's just that I'm crappy at it. And so anyway, I'm fascinated by con men. I just wanted to have fun with that idea.
I feel like and one thing I heard you talk about too is that it's a heist novel. We both use the word heist.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about how in some ways history is so sprawling, and like the most intimidating thing to me is like, how do I put boundaries around what I'm going to do? And I felt like the idea of a heist novel, at least at the inception of the novel, was a way for me to kind of control, like, okay, here's something, my simple way in, and it of course like becomes like so much more complicated than that. But was heist something you had in mind at the beginning, or was it something that arose out of the? Yeah,
sure, because I love things where, for example, like the track you're on is very familiar. It's like the Hollywood, kind of heist track, but the details are bizarre. So you have the kind of comfort of the form, but at the same time, you're constantly surprised by the alien details. That, in fact, like everything that I read there about Saint Anastasia, about what relics are where, that is all entirely accurate from the point of view of medieval nonfiction. They would believe all of that. So now, and what about that? Like, so what about sort of like, how did you choose details to kind of like illuminate that heist for you?
I mean, I will say, and I'm curious about your relationship to research, but I was very intimidated by the research. I just didn't.
You have like a couple of nations, three nations.
I kept growing. Initially, it was supposed to be the English country house novel, and I was like, I'll just read. I bought a book about English country houses, never opened it. I was immediately intimidated, never opened it. So I think initially one of the, I don't even remember what I was going to say about that. What was your question? Like, what was the research?
How did you choose which details to kind of dress up the heist in?
I mean, I really liked, I think the research what I was looking for was the weird. I think I'm drawn to the eccentric detail, like the idiosyncrasies, which I think is hard with research sometimes because depending on the historian, they're looking at like large scale. They're looking at historical forces, and they're not necessarily interested in the weird idioms. I think to me, like what I'm looking for a lot of times is something I find funny, because that I think like a detail that gives you something about the personality of the people who lived that time is actually kind of rare unless you're reading diaries. And so I think, you know, like there's this one thing when the capital city was sacked of Srirangapatna, and things were being looted, these, East India Company soldiers. And one thing they looted, Tipu Sultan is dying, and he died. He was shot in the head, and he's laying there dying, and this soldier comes up and snips the corner of his mustache, not unlike your mustache, yeah, and took it, and the superior officer was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I mean, everybody's doing it," and he ended up, and that became a relic, and like people would say, "This is that mustache," and I have the mustache, and so just little things like that are so weird that it's almost like I could not have come up with that, and so that's kind of what I'm hunting for a lot of times.
Especially because like things like we know what an English country house novel is supposed to be like, or we know to some extent there's even kind of like there is a 20th century sort of set of models about how to deal with English colonialism, the jewel in the crown kind of thing. So like what's so cool about those details is that they unsettle us from what we know, so that we actually have to confront, wait a second, the English country house is a super weird social domestic form. Like it's really alien to us. Like the fact that we've watched Downton Abbey, like that kind of like, finds ways to gloss over things. It's really a weird way to live.
It is, and I'm curious because there's more reference points probably for the English country house time. There's fewer for year 1000. Is it 1000 around there? Yes. Yeah. So I mean, was that challenging when you have so few reference points for, like what were you relying on in order to kind of invent your 1092?
Yeah, so nerddom means that there are any number of books about what life was like in the 11th century or whatever. But what was important to me in a sense was everyone feels like they know the Middle Ages, which, even though it's a 1,000-year span of history that encompasses very different cultures and that kind of thing. And frankly, one of the big deals is that, sorry, this is just a little bit of a diversion, but after the Charlottesville riots, a lot of medievalists and classicists started to realize the way that American white supremacists have taken up the Middle Ages as being this period that appears to them to be one of ethnic isolation and therefore of a kind of a beautiful purity. And it laid bare for a lot of medievalists were sort of like, oh shit, these are the kids who've been sitting in my classes for my whole career, and I haven't realized how they're taking all of this. And the focus of, when we say the Middle Ages, it's really a period that makes sense in like Western European history, though of course events are going on all over the world. So one of the big pushes academically about the medieval right now is to say, wait a second, we have to see this as a whole system. The whole Eurasian continent is involved in communication in this period. It's much less than it was later, but it still is there. So a lot of it actually was kind of trying to resuscitate that idea of the unknown Middle Ages away from kind of just like castles, chicks with wimples, knights, and instead to a thing where it was much more about like what the Mediterranean was like, which is this dynamic center of, especially around 1100, when Western Europe was just kind of like a big mud pit. The Eastern Mediterranean was where the action was at. It was where the great civilizations were, and so to try to resuscitate that as being this site of cultural contact and dynamism, that was really interesting. And to kind of insist on that in a way that I thought would surprise readers, because it was such a cosmopolitan and internationalist society.
I've been thinking, what you're talking about in terms of the co-opting of medieval history by white nationalists, it's making me think about how I more and more I really think I love experiences where I realize I did not know, I misunderstood something. Yes. I really misperceived something. And it's a really vulnerable state to be in a state that's hard to admit being in, and especially in our current day and age when you're supposed to have an opinion on everything and it's supposed to be the right opinion. Right. But I love fiction that shows me that I really got something wrong. And the process of researching this novel really exposed so many moments of my misunderstanding.
Yeah, like, so what were the big surprises?
I mean, just the fact that Americans in other parts of the world were very aware of what was going on in South India at this time. I never learned about it. I didn't even know about Tipu's tiger until I was researching this book. But like, for example, the early Americans were really inspired by the sort of rebellions of Tipu Sultan and his father, particularly Hyder Ali, who were, putting up a really strong resistance to British colonial efforts to kind of wipe them out. And so, at one point, George Washington named one of their ships the Hyder Ali. I mean, he misspelled it completely. It's okay. We forgive you. But just the awareness that different countries had, and that this was before a time, things were much more, colonial power was not what we think of it as it is now. And so these were all sort of nations that were all watching each other, and I just did not understand also connections between colonialism, slavery, how that, all these things are connected. And so
because like if you think about the revolution, so much of it is down to the English East India Company and tea prices and tea. I mean, like the tea tax thing is a very serious deal in the colonies in that period, right. and it's related to colonial rule.
Right, and maybe if France hadn't spent all that money in America, like trying to help them with the revolution, maybe they would have put more money into South India. Tipu Sultan was constantly going to France and being like, please give me some money. I want to kick out your enemy here. But these are all the things that are connected. So I find that those kind of gaps in my own awareness really interesting, and I love reading fiction that kind of does the same thing to me.
Totally, yeah. Well, and in fact, I remember reading what was his name? I'm trying to remember that. There's a guy who wrote a book that's specifically about the connections between like the famine in South India and the American Revolution. Anyway, so the point is that like I remember reading that and it was totally eye-opening to see like, oh God, like there's this situation there that's so extreme, and then it does in many ways lead to the unexpected consequences. Yeah.
Obviously, we're vibing here, but you should all please feel free to ask questions.
That's a good idea.
Too.
Yeah.
I have a question. You both have talked about music. This is Tania, obviously the organ component, but Tobin, the music about St. Nicholas that inspired you. Can you both talk about your musical research into these historical periods?
Yeah. Wait, did you hear the tiger played?
It was really anticlimactic, actually. I mean, it's 200 years old, so I found a YouTube video and it was really like, and I like, it probably worked better. I like to imagine that it worked better in the past, but yeah.
So there are a couple of things. One is that Benjamin Britten has a cantata for, which is really cleverly written for like school choir, but then a professional soloist and string quartet that is just called St. Nicholas, which is about events from the life of the so-called historical St. Nicholas. And then also, this is so bizarre, but there are these 12th century monastic operas based on the life of Nicholas, where they take episodes and turn them into these very gorgeous, very chilly, static kind of operas. And if you think about the one that with the guy who's killing kids and then pickling them in St. Nicholas, that's one of them. It's a musical play called Tres Clerici. It's essentially like a medieval Sweeney Todd,
you know? And so these would be sung by monks, probably like the younger monks, on St. Nicholas's Eve on December 6th. So anyway, like listening to those really kind of inspired me, yeah, because it's such a strange aesthetic.
I just want to know how a dogman worked its way into your novel, and how much fun was it deciding that a dogman needed to be in your novel?
Do you want to field this one first? So yes, there is a dog man, and so this is actually important. This is something that you actually probably will have an opinion about. What I wanted to do was, I wanted to present. I was like, okay, if I'm going to write a historical novel, what you do is you base it on nonfiction texts, right? Well, medieval nonfiction texts have a very different view of the world than we do. I mean, now historians will look at a saint's life and they get out of it something like the one sentence that happens to be about like grain distribution or something. Whereas for the medieval person, that's irrelevant. What they care about is that this lady like picked up her own severed head and walked 7 miles with it, you know? And so I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take medieval nonfiction seriously. I'm going to write, if you are blind to what you believe is real and only invest yourself in the view of the medieval person, what would they see as real and how would they write a historical novel? So that was kind of the idea. And so, you know, like, though it's very hard to find out about for example, the progress of the Seljuk Turks through Anatolia, a thing that is of actual quite a lot of consequence. It's very easy to find out about dogmen. So, you know, like from Herodotus onward, everyone says there are dogmen in the mountains to the east, except for the Chinese in the classic of Mountains and Seas, who say there are dogmen in the mountains to the west. So I'm like, well, clearly there's somewhere between there's somewhere in the Himalayas. So yeah, so I decided to put in a dogman to kind of insist upon the medieval view of things. But yes, but to turn this to a question to you, how do you deal with the alien ways people think in the past, and how do you turn to depict that?
What was alien to me more was reading historians that I thought were patently racist or ridiculous. And I was like, I don't know how to write a neutral version of this history. I'm not a neutral party to the history. And so I kind of tried to sort of infiltrate the voice of the narration and sort of occasionally just talk directly to the reader and say, isn't this ridiculous that this is happening? Isn't this absurd? Because I just think much of history is sort of absurd, and the sort of neutral tone that a lot of history books take, I understand the reason for that, but because there's a different, it's a different agenda there. But I liked to kind of poke a little fun in a way and sort of cozy up to the reader in some way to sort of, I don't know, just sort of, I think it's an extension of the playfulness that I enjoy. Like when I think more and more as a reader, I am drawn to work like fiction that makes me that has like profound and serious things to say about our lives and our existence, but there's a kind of way in which there's a kind of playfulness, there's a kind of sort of slightly skewed angle and approach. Yeah.
Well, which is super important because, in fact, we need to revise the way that history is seen, for a new age.
I mean, I think like I like historical fiction not because I'm particularly interested. Me personally, I don't go to historical fiction because I'm interested in this particular moment in history that I'm reading about. I'm interested in Toby's version of that history. What do you think? What is your personality behind the history? What are you doing with that history?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess for me, a lot of it is to see how do they play with the things we know and kind of surprise you. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, because I feel like it connects with the purpose of all literature, which is to kind of take us away from what we know far enough that we can look back at what we know and see it kind of anew. And so, like looking at some, kind of like what I think I'll probably do this afternoon, which is climbing, what is it called? One Tennaquasket? Yeah, okay, we'll leave that there. But, and it's so neat to climb that hill and to look over at the city and to see everything kind of in this new vantage point. That, to me, is the heart of literature, and it's what the historical novel can do. It can show you the present in a new way and the past as well. So I don't know what kind of time we have. Do we have time for another question, or?
Sure, to have another question,
Okay.
I'll check the time.
This is actually more for you. You said you didn't know anything about woodworking and that. The book, and I haven't read yours, but I've read yours, and I was just so amazed at the detail of that. So how much time, you have to understand that in order to be able to write that. So I felt like you had to be an expert at that. And then all the different countries and cultures, and just how much of the work was research, and then did it just go away so you could infuse the story with the story?
That's a great question. Are there any woodworkers in the audience? That's good.
No, because it's surprising. In Vermont, usually like all the hands are going
I
up.
just want to make sure before I answer this question that we're a safe space with no woodworkers. Okay. That was one of the scarier things. Every time I would encounter something, there's a whole, section that's from the perspective of a sailor. I can't even swim. I can swim one lap, half a lap. And so every time I would encounter this thing, I would just say, how am I going to persuade a reader to believe that I know anything about this? And also it was during the pandemic, so I couldn't go watch a woodworker. So I looked on YouTube and I watched a lot of videos about these guys who turn a block of wood into a bear. Maybe some of them live up here, like these bear sculptures and different wood sculptures. And I just eventually I did read a memoir, a beautiful memoir, and I can't remember his name, but about this man who does these like very fine woodworking, wood carvings. But I ultimately I felt like it's more important to the reader. I don't think the reader necessarily wants to learn about wood carving. I think the reader wants to know about the artist's relationship to their art. And how do they talk to their peers about that art? And what are the things, like Toby and I are both writers, but if I asked you what you struggle with your writing, what you love about it, we would have different answers, I'm assuming. Maybe it's not, but maybe, we would just have different experiences. So I kept that in mind. I just need to know enough that two people can be talking about it and have their own personal relationship to it. A lot of the things I'm writing, it felt to me the things I learned about carving were not unlike some of the ways I feel about writing, which is that one thing in particular, which is that you can't expect to control the outcome too much. And that too gripping a thing too tight, that can actually lead to like an accident. You have to kind of work with things as they develop and go with the mistakes sometimes. That felt very resonant to me as a writer. But yeah, so for the most part, it was just about that character. What is their personal emotional relationship to the art making?
But you also have all those other worlds that you created,
Yeah.
So did you spend a lot of research time in France?
No. I did go to France for a few days. I don't know. I think my process of research a lot of times is just learning as much as I need to know to write 20 pages. It's kind of, and then it sort of sails out of my brain because I can't remember anything past that 20, 25 pages. Star quoted a line from my book to me, and I was like, I believe you that's in there. Yeah, I just learn what I need to know, use it, let it go. And whatever is retained, and that's fine, but yeah.
So I've read everything you write. I'm your biggest fan.
Thank you.
I really don't
you're talking about this is your first novel for adults, and I'm thinking about Octavia Nothing and the pain I carry with me after reading those novels, and I know you call that, young novels for young people, and you call The Siege of Leningrad not how are you making these?
Well, I feel like, both of the things that you've talked about, the Octavian Nothing books and the Shostakovich book, are both, I would say, for sort of like 16 or 15 and older, whatever the older is. Like, especially the Shostakovich book. I was telling Tania, actually, when I was doing events for that, I was doing events at high schools and retirement communities. Because it's a book about Russia during World War II. And so my feeling is that, I, as a teenager, wanted to deal with how the world really was. And that includes, incredibly difficult, dramatic situations that I would not want to live through myself. And therefore, as a writer, I was just like, no, that I'm going to write for, when I was a kid, at least, we had to turn to literature for adults to find a lot of that. We had sort of the so-called problem novel that was supposed to teach us about things like, it felt like very, very pat, just like, don't use drugs, masturbation's okay, whatever it was. So we had the problem novel, but we didn't have things that dealt with larger issues. And so one of the things was when I was younger, which was when those books were written, I specifically felt like I want to do stuff that addresses for teens who want novels that deal with that kind of density of event, but are written also with them in mind. So that was sort of my idea. Yeah.
Was there some historical Octavian?
Yeah, there were. There were various models for him of yeah, absolutely, yeah. Even at Harvard, which we both attended. There were, for example, there were attempts there were sort of attempts to deal with the idea of race and knowledge, where they would, for example, force Native American kids to learn Greek and Latin, and then be like, why do you think this is useless? How could this possibly be useless? And those kids actually, by and large, fled. They were just like, screw this, and they fled. But but there were various at Cambridge. They did the same thing with training kids in Greek and Latin to see essentially as sort of experiments. So all of that was real. That was undertaken in the 18th century. Yeah.
We have one more question. I want to know what you read as children and if it affected with your writing.
Do you have a ready answer?
Well, I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, especially. I read a lot of Ray Bradbury, and especially I still think he's a beautiful writer. And his use of symbolism in particular, I think, probably crept into my own writing. Like the Martian Chronicles, which is really about American colonialism and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, a lot of that. Also, a lot of trashy science fiction and fantasy, which I would not cop to, but which, because of the way that neural development works, I can remember every detail of. Whereas really wonderful books I read 2 weeks ago, I can't remember a thing about.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I am waiting till I can introduce my son to the Three Musketeers. I loved the Three Musketeers, and then it had the sequels. We were talking about sequels. Amazing. Everyone was amazing. I loved Victor Hugo. I guess I was just a really deeply serious child. And I wanted the struggle of, what was it, the Count of Monte Cristo. Oh, God. Yeah, I just feel like now I want to go back to those novels. But yeah, they are really just solidified in my mind, everything that happens.
Yeah, someone was recently talking about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I remember enjoying as a kid, but when I went back to it, it's so funny. When you reread that book as an adult, what it basically is, again and again, is they're tooling along in their submarine. They look out the window and they're like, look at these glorious creatures, the glory of God's creation, and then they list them all by Latin name and stuff, and talk about the beauty of the fish, and then they frickin' eat them. Like, basically, it's just like a 20,000 league long smorgasbord for them. It's the dumbest book.
Maybe I won't revisit them. Those stay perfect in my
But
mind.
wait, no, because someone needs to write this novel. In in Victor Hugo's follow-up to it, he talks about the past of Captain Nemo. Holy crap! No, see, and Captain Nemo is revealed to be an Indian guy who is pissed at the slaughter of his family by the British. That's why he's on this whole mission of destruction.
God, now I have to revisit it.
Yeah,
It's
no,
just-
you need to write a novel. You need to write a novel.
There it is. There it is, people. Call me in 9 years. I'll have it ready.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to both of you and to this wonderful, smart audience with all its great questions, and to the Brattleboro Literary Festival. I did want to also mention that today, just coincidentally, is a day of action for people to unite against banned books. And Tobin has been a long banned booker. So we do have a display of banned books back there. You can take your picture with one of your favorites. You can use the QR code to sign up to say that you're against banned books. And do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I had a story that I told Star, which is that my book Feed, which is about a dystopian novel about future technology, was actually banned this summer by ChatGPT in Iowa. So, Iowa created this insane law that says that no school library or teen section of public libraries can have any books that have, quote, sexual situations in them. But they had a list already of thousands, tens of thousands of books. So they just ran that list through ChatGPT, which came up with a list of 19, which it felt were too salacious. But it was super outrageous, not only because they used that, the sort of idiotic algorithm, but because most of the books on that list, not mine, but most of the books on that list were actually absolute classics of American literature, often African American literature, like Beloved, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, that kind of thing, that were actually about sexual violence, not about anything that was quote unquote sexy. And it was so pitiless and weird to think of this legislature of men in particular shutting down what was, I think, 12 out of the 19 novels were really about sexual violence against girls. And so there was something just so insidious feeling about that, and about the fact that it was done so carelessly. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing we're up against. And we've got it, to be a great civilization, to be a great society, we have to have knowledge that's open and illuminated, and everyone has access to it. There you go.
Thank you so much. What a great note to end.